The forest was dying around him, every brittle leaf a whisper of the life that once thrived there. Twilight cast long skeletal shadows through the skeletal trees, their bare limbs clawing at the fading sky. The air was brittle with cold, heavy, with silence. Beneath a gnarled oak older than memory itself, Tom Harris lay crumpled against the rough bark. His wrists were bound tightly by a rusted iron chain that had bitten deep into his weathered skin. Blood, dried and blackened, crusted the tangled grey beard that framed his bruised and swollen face. His breath came in ragged gasps, shallow and broken. Once he had been a soldier. Once he had led men into battle, fearless and sure. Once he had been a name spoken with respect. Now he was little more than a discarded memory. "Please," he croaked, though no one remained to hear him. Not like this. Only hours ago he had been walking along the lonely road that skirted the woods, lost, disoriented, muttering to himself against the memories that stalked him even in daylight. A group of young men, drunk on cruelty and arrogance, had spotted him. They mocked him, called him crazy old vet. They laughed when he jumped at the backfire of a passing truck. They decided it would be fun to teach him a lesson. They dragged him into the forest. They beat him until he could no longer stand. They chained him to the tree like an unwanted animal, and then they left him to die. But Tom knew in his gut they would come back. The kind of men who did this, they always came back. Sure enough, footsteps crunched through the leaves once more. Tom closed his eyes. He had no strength left to fight. He heard laughter, mocking, cruel. "Still breathing, old man?" One voice sneered. "Maybe we should finish the job," another said. There was a click, the unmistakable sound of a phone camera being readied. No doubt, they would upload his suffering for likes and fleeting fame. But then, something changed. A sound, low and dangerous, cut through the dusk. A growl, deep and primal, vibrating the very air. The laughter died instantly. From the underbrush, a massive German shepherd erupted, a blur of muscle, teeth, and righteous fury. The dog, for a moment, Tom thought he must be hallucinating, launched itself at the nearest boy. Powerful jaws clamped onto the young man's forearm, tearing through the fabric of his hoodie and sinking deep into flesh. The boy screamed, high and panicked, thrashing violently. Another tried to fight back, swinging a thick branch like a club. But the dog released the first attacker and lunged, at the second snapping the branch with a single brutal bite. "Run!" The third boy screamed, already stumbling backward. The three of them turned and fled, crashing through the underbrush, their screams echoing among the ancient trees. And just like that, the forest fell silent once more. Only the crackle of disturbed leaves and the old man's ragged breathing remained. Slowly, the dog turned back toward the oak tree. Tom, his vision blurred by pain and tears, stared in disbelief. The shape was wrong. The moment was wrong. It could not be, but it was. "Sarge," he croaked, the word barely a whisper. The dog's ears perked at the sound of his name. A whimper escaped his throat, a sound of recognition, of memory. He approached cautiously, sniffing the broken man bound to the tree. And then, with the calm determination of a soldier performing his duty, Sarge clamped his powerful jaws around the rusted chain and began to pull. Tom felt the pressure ease at his wrist as the chain groaned and strained. Bite by tug, Sarge worked. His teeth worried at the corroded links until with a final metallic snap the chain gave way. Tom collapsed forward, his body too weak to support itself. Sarge pressed his weight against the man's side, steadying him. Tears streamed down Tom's battered face as he reached out, trembling, and buried his fingers in the thick fur at Sarge's neck. "You came back," he whispered. "After all these years, you came back." Sarge whined softly, licking Tom's bruised hand, tail wagging once, twice slow and deliberate. Step by agonizing step, leaning on the dog who had once saved him in a war half a world away, Tom Harris staggered out of the forest. The chains still clinked loosely at his wrists. Blood dried on his face. The night air bit into his skin, but he was not alone. Not anymore. The world beyond the trees seemed impossibly vast. The night had fallen fully now, and the cold gnawed at Tom's battered frame. But he pressed on, each staggering step driven not by strength, but by the loyalty pressed against his side, the only thing keeping him upright. Sarge moved with careful patience, matching his master's. Broken pace, every muscle taut with focus. He was not just leading Tom out of the forest, he was leading him home. Somehow through instinct, through memory, they reached a road. Headlights from a passing car flashed briefly in the distance. Tom raised a trembling arm, waving weakly. The car slowed, braked, and a man rushed out, his voice cutting through the night. "God Almighty, are you all right?" The man pulled out his phone with shaking hands, dialing emergency services as Sarge stood between him and Tom, watching, guarding, judging. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Flashing lights painted the woods in surreal colors. Hands lifted Tom onto a stretcher, wrapped him in blankets, checked his pulse, his eyes, his breathing. "You're lucky," one EMT said softly. "Another hour in this cold." Tom didn't answer. He could only look for Sarge, and the moment he saw him, still standing firm against the chaos, still watching, still guarding, he closed his eyes in relief. They would not be separated again. Not this time. In the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire. The battered veteran, the loyal dog who saved him, the miracle reunion after years apart. Local news stations aired footage of Tom and Sarge, frail but alive, together again. One viewer, a former Marine Corps medic, now working at a regional veteran outreach center, recognized something others missed. Not just the bond, but the need. He made the call himself. Within 48 hours, Tom and Sarge were transferred together to the center, a modest facility, tucked on the outskirts of town, dedicated to helping forgotten warriors heal. The first night, the staff prepared for the worst. Tom's file was grim, severe PTSD, history of violent night terrors, episodes of panic and dissociation. They braced for alarms, for screaming, for broken furniture. But the night passed in silence. When a nurse peeked into Tom's room just before dawn, she found the answer. Tom was sleeping, truly sleeping, for the first time in years. Sarge lay curled beside him, one heavy paw resting gently on Tom's chest. His head lifted slightly when the door creaked, ears flicking once, then settled again. The staff watched, breathless. They had seen therapy dogs before. They had never seen anything like this. In the weeks that followed, a miracle unfolded. Tom changed, slowly, painfully, but unmistakably. He began eating full meals. He spoke in sentences instead of broken fragments. He walked the center's garden paths each morning, Sarge pacing patiently beside him. When the memories grew sharp and jagged, when Tom's hands began to tremble, when his breathing hitched, Sarge was there. Sometimes a nudge under his hand, sometimes a warm weight pressing against his side. Sometimes, just the simple, steady presence, a heartbeat beside his own. The center's psychologist noticed quickly. "This isn't just companionship," she said during a staff meeting. "This is something deeper, a lifeline." They brought in specialists. Evaluations were done, forms were signed. Sarge was officially designated as Tom's medical support animal. But titles didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time in years, Tom Harris was not alone. The world outside changed with the seasons, so too did the world inside Tom. Where once there had been only silence and fear, there was now routine and purpose. Mornings meant coffee shared with Sarge at a sunlit window. Afternoons meant quiet walks through town, a harness resting lightly against Tom's arm, a living anchor guiding him forward. Evenings meant simple, peace, the quiet scratch of pen against paper, as Tom began writing letters again to his daughter, to old friends trying to rebuild the bridges he had once burned in the fire of his pain. And always, Sarge was there, watching, listening, waiting, not as a servant, but as a brother. One evening, as twilight spilled gold across the center's small garden, Tom sat on a worn bench beneath an ancient elm tree. Sarge lay sprawled at his feet, chin resting heavily on Tom's boot. The old Marine pulled a battered photograph from his jacket pocket. So worn the edges were nearly translucent. It showed a younger man dressed in desert fatigues, crouched beside a proud young German shepherd with bright, eager eyes. Tom traced the image with one trembling finger. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. Sarge's ears twitched. His tail thumped softly against the dirt. Tom laughed a broken sound, but laughter nonetheless. "You always were too stubborn to let go," he said. The sun dipped lower. The world grew quiet. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Tom Harris truly felt the simple, impossible beauty of being alive. The desert sun was merciless. In Helmand province, Afghanistan, it baked the earth into cracked, broken clay. Dust clung to everything: skin, uniforms, weapons. It seeped into lungs and coated throats until every breath tasted of grit and war. It was 2010, and Sergeant Tom Harris was an older man among young soldiers. At 52, his hair already graying beneath his helmet, he had seen more battlefields than most of his men had years in their lives. But no one doubted him. Tom moved through the chaos of war with the calm precision of a man who had long since made peace with death. His commands were few, his words steady, and wherever he went, a shadow followed him. A German shepherd, lean and powerful, muscles rippling beneath. A sun-bleached K9 vest. Sarge. They had been paired 6 months earlier, a bond born not of choice, but necessity. Explosive detection. Every day, every step was a gamble in Helmand. The roads were riddled with IEDs, pressure plates, hidden death. Sarge was the difference between life and annihilation. From the very first patrol, there had been something different about him. Not just training, not just instinct, something deeper. Sarge didn't obey Tom because he had to. He obeyed because he trusted him. They moved as one, a rhythm, a dance. Tom learned the subtle shifts in Sarge's body language, the way his tail stiffened when he caught a scent, the way his ears twitched when danger lurked. Sarge learned the tone of Tom's voice, the tilt of his head, the smallest of signals. In a world that tore men apart, they became something rare, whole. There were days the memories would later blur: endless patrols under a pitiless sky, the constant fear humming beneath every heartbeat. But some days stayed sharp. One afternoon, moving down a narrow mountain trail, Sarge froze. His body went rigid, nose low, tail straight like a flag of warning. Tom raised a clenched fist instantly, the universal sign to halt. The unit froze behind him, the only sounds the faint whistle of the desert wind and the distant bark of crows. Carefully, Sarge began pawing at a patch of disturbed earth. Tom's heart thundered. He dropped to one knee, studying the ground, barely visible, a thread of wire, almost invisible against the dust. He signaled back. EOD moved in with the slow reverence of men who knew death waited only inches below. An hour later, the verdict came. Pressure plate. Enough explosives buried to shred a Humvee. If not for Sarge, they would have all died. Tom knelt beside the dog, scratching behind his ears. "You saved us, boy," he whispered. Sarge simply wagged his tail once and pressed his forehead against Tom's chest. There were no medals for dogs, but there were bonds stronger than steel. Weeks later, disaster struck. They were escorting a convoy of supply trucks through contested terrain when the world exploded. Gunfire from the hills, screams, dust and blood and noise. Tom barked orders, returning fire with machine precision. Sarge was at his side, growling low, muscles taut. Then, an explosion. Tom never even heard it coming. One moment he was running, the next, he was flying, the sky spinning wildly. He hit the ground hard, pain blossoming in his leg, blood pouring from a deep gash. Everything blurred. Dust in his mouth, the weight of his rifle dragging at his shoulder, and darkness, thick and final. They told him later what happened next. That Sarge had stood over his broken body, snarling, daring anyone to approach. That medics had to restrain him to lift Tom onto the medevac helicopter. That the last thing Sarge had seen as the chopper lifted away was his handler disappearing into the sky. Tom awoke days later in Germany, the sterile white walls of the hospital room closing in like a prison. His first thought wasn't of his wounds, it was of Sarge. But no one had answers. Sarge had been reassigned, they said. Classified, lost in the machinery of war. Tom fought letters, calls, demands, but nothing pierced the cold wall of bureaucracy. Sarge was gone, And with him, a part of Tom had died. The months that followed were a blur. Surgeries, rehabilitation, paperwork, a discharge, a plane ride home to a country that seemed alien and cold. Tom returned not as a hero, but as a ghost. The uniform he once wore with pride now hung in his closet like a shroud. He tried to rebuild his life, tried to reconnect with his daughter, tried to find work, but the wounds inside were too deep. The sound of fireworks sent him crawling under tables. The slam of a car door triggered fights he couldn't remember starting. He lost jobs. He lost friends. Eventually, he lost even the strength to try. He drifted park benches, shelters, the floor of abandoned buildings. A statistic. Another. Broken veteran the world had forgotten. The only thing he kept was a photograph worn and fragile of himself and Sarge, smiling in a brief, stolen moment of peace. Each night, as the cold pressed against him, he would pull it from his pocket and whisper, "Where are you, buddy?" He never stopped asking. And somewhere far away, neither did Sarge. In a quiet facility on the outskirts of town, Sarge waited. He had been deemed unfit for active duty after losing Tom too aggressive in the field, too distrusting of new handlers. He was retired, cared for, but not healed. He refused to play with other dogs, refused to bond with new people. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he would sit at the far end of the fenced yard, staring westward, waiting. And then, one morning, he was simply gone. No barking, no broken fences, no alarms, just a trail of paw prints vanishing into the woods, as if something had called to him, some voice only he could hear, some memory too strong to be denied. He had set out alone, driven not by instinct, not by training, but by love, by a promise unbroken by war, by time, by anything the world could throw between them, a promise that would find its end or its beginning beneath a gnarled oak in a dying forest. The days at the Veteran Center passed like a slow, healing tide. The world beyond still spun in its chaos, but within those quiet halls, Tom and Sarge found something they thought they'd lost forever: peace. It wasn't immediate. Healing never is. There were still dark nights, nights when memories clawed their way back with sharp, bloody fingers, nights when Tom would sit bolt upright, sweat pouring down his face, the sounds of mortars and gunfire ringing in his ears. But now there was something different. Now there was Sarge, always Sarge. The dog would be there before Tom even realized he was drowning, a heavy, comforting presence pressing against his side, grounding him to the here and now, one paw resting against his heart, one look deep, steady, unwavering. And somehow, every time, Tom would find his way back. He wasn't alone anymore. He had never been alone. Spring came early that year. The trees outside the center burst into fragile blooms. The grass stretched green beneath a soft, forgiving sun. Tom grew stronger. He took longer walks. He spoke more to the staff, to the other veterans. He even laughed real laughter, raw and surprising, bursting from him in clumsy, beautiful fits. And everywhere he went, Sarge was at his side. A shadow, a protector, a friend. People in town began to recognize them. The grizzled old Marine with the kind eyes, the majestic German shepherd, gray creeping into his muzzle, but still carrying himself with the proud grace of a soldier. The barista at the corner cafe left a water bowl outside for Sarge. Children in the park would run up shyly, asking if they could pet him. Tom, who once flinched from every sudden sound, now knelt patiently telling them stories. About a dog who once saved lives in a faraway desert. About a bond that even war could not destroy. Then came Memorial Day. The town organized a small ceremony on the grassy field behind the Civic Center. Folding chairs were set in neat rows. Tiny flags fluttered in the breeze. The names of the fallen were read aloud. One by one, each name a heavy stone laid gently on the heart. Tom sat in the back row, Sarge lying at his feet. He hadn't planned to speak, but as the ceremony drew toward its close, the master of ceremonies, an old army captain with a chest full of ribbons, stepped up to the microphone and cleared his throat. "Today," he said, "we honor not only those who fell, but those who carried the invisible wounds of war home with them. One such man is here with us. The captain's eyes found Tom in the crowd. Sergeant Tom Harris. Would you say a few words? For a moment, Tom couldn't move. Every instinct screamed at him to stay hidden, but then he felt it, a weight against his leg. He looked down. Sarge gazed up at him, calm, steady, waiting, as if saying, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Tom took a breath, pushed himself to his feet, and always together he and Sarge walked to the front. Hundreds of faces turned toward him. Tom gripped the microphone tightly in both hands, his knuckles white. For a moment, there was only the soft whisper of the wind. Then he spoke. "War takes things from you," he began, his voice rough but sure. "It takes pieces you never get back." He paused, searching for the right words. "It took my friends. It took my peace. For a long time, I thought it had taken me too." He looked down. "Gad, Sarge." But sometimes, he continued, his voice thick with emotion, "what you think you've lost, it comes back." He swallowed hard. "It finds you in the dark. It finds you when you're ready to give up. It reminds you of who you are." Tom's hand found Sarge's harness. "This dog, this soldier, found me when no one else would. He brought me back to myself." A silence fell. Across the field, heavy, sacred. Tom took one last breath, steady now. "And so today, I don't just remember the fallen. I remember the ones who pulled us back from the edge, the ones who kept fighting even when the world forgot them." He smiled, then a small, broken, radiant smile. "Sometimes heroes come on four legs." He stepped back from the microphone, the crowd rising in silent, reverent applause. It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It was pure, it was real. It was enough. The ceremony ended. The chairs were folded away. Families drifted off into the long, golden afternoon. But Tom stayed. He found a bench overlooking the rolling hills, the sun sinking low on the horizon. Sarge lay beside him, head resting on Tom's boot. They sat there for a long time, saying nothing. They didn't need words anymore. The bond between them spoke louder than language ever could. The last rays of sun bathed them in gold. A soldier, a friend, two battered souls, stitched back together by loyalty, by memory, by love. Home, at last, and never alone again. And so ends the story of Tom Harris and Sarge, a story of survival, of loyalty, and of the unbreakable bond between a soldier and his dog. A story that reminds us that no matter how lost we may feel, no matter how long the silence stretches, there are some promises that time can never break, some hearts that never stop searching, some friends who always find their way back, even across battlefields, even across years, even across broken dreams, because some loves are stronger than war, stronger than fear, stronger than silence. And sometimes, if we are lucky, they come, racing back to us on four legs, teeth bared, ready to fight for us one last time. And if we are very lucky, we get to walk home together.